Hello, sir.
Hello, Ankit.
Sir, recently the Chief Minister of Telangana, Mr. Revant Reddy, while addressing a gathering of ex-civil servants, made a few comments and observations about the bureaucracy in general. He said that the civil servants earlier used to advise the political executive about the pros and cons of a policy policy formulation, but now it is happening very less. He also mentioned that wrong precedents are being taken as role models. He mentioned in particular that the IAS is not being very proactive. He said that there is resistance to going onto the field. What are your thoughts on these comments?
I broadly agree with the criticism of the civil services. At the time of recruitment, we probably have the best civil service.
Right.
Because in a country of 1.45 billion people, among the millions of university graduates, the brightest appear for these competitive examinations. Something like 1.5 million people make an attempt only for the union civil services, for about 700 or 800 officers, of which IAS constitutes maybe 10%, about 70, 80, 100. And once you pick up from 1.5 million, only 700, of them only about 70 or 80 or 100 or so in the IAS, you're bound to have the best. And with all our inefficiencies elsewhere, the Union Public Service Commission does a grand job of selecting these people. No selection is perfect, but there is no credible allegation so far against them in terms of integrity or competence. They're doing a grand job. But what's happening is the way civil services are structured, the way intensives are aligned, and the way society venerates any public office, a position of power, they're all coming in the way of the civil services delivering the best for the country.
Right.
And therefore, some of the criticism is perfectly valid and justified. We have to introspect. Unfortunately, far too many people want to join civil service because of this desperation to be recognized with the notion of power, position, glamour, recognition, not a spirit of public service. And after they join, we are not really empowering them with skills, with specialization. India is one of the few countries, in fact the only one outside of Indian subcontinent, there's none else, where the civil service still is generalist, all purpose. Anybody can do any job. Today you can be in information technology, tomorrow you can be healthcare, third day you'll be in industry, fourth day you'll be in defense. It's absurd in this day of specialization. And automatic time-bound promotions and lifelong security, irrespective of performance. And third, monopoly of all the key positions in government. These are the three unique features of the civil services in India. You combine all these three in any private sector company, the company will collapse in no time.
Right.
Because incentives are misaligned. So it's not so much that the recruitment is bad, it is that what we're doing with the civil services is terrible. And therefore, while a small number of people are doing an outstanding job, there's no question about it, we should be proud of them in terms of integrity, in terms of competence, in terms of commitment to public good. They're doing a heroic job. But the vast majority are failing.
Right.
And if we don't recognize it, and if we don't measure the civil services by the outcomes they generate, rather than the hot air they generate, I think we are being poorly served. In no other country is bureaucracy so venerated, and in terms of GDP per capita standards, so well paid. And yet, in no other country is it less accountable, is it less efficient in delivery, is it in general not performing up to the standards that are required.
So at one point of time, it was called the IAS particularly was called the steel frame, right? So where do you think the decline has happened from?
See, in terms of holding the nation together, maintaining order of sorts, and unity and integrity of India, I suppose we have to admit that All India services have done a reasonable job.
Okay.
Not a great job. For instance, take Telangana state itself, and the erstwhile state of Andhra Pradesh was divided into two, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. There was an occasion when the police forces of both the states, they actually came to a direct combat. Except they did not use guns, they used lathis, etc. In Nagarjuna Saga, they were almost a pitched battle. That does not indicate civil service leadership which promoted national unity.
Right.
But in general, I think we have to acknowledge that in terms of broadly maintaining order, not necessarily rule of law, in terms of protecting national unity, they have done a reasonable job. But that's the minimum required. That's not enough. And even there are deficiencies. So the steel frame is an overstated thing. And the notion that, at one time before independence, they were regarded as guardians. The predecessor of Indian Administrative Service, ICS, they were called guardians. I don't think anybody can reasonably claim today that the civil services are acting as guardians of society. Individuals are. There are exceptional individuals who are doing a great job, a commendable job. But as a class of public servants, I think India is very poorly served.
Right. So in our internal discussions, you've often mentioned about a series called Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. So it appears that there is a clash between, or is there a clash between the incentives and motives of a civil servant and the politician?
No, as Yes Minister, as Prime Minister, they showed, it's a global problem.
Okay.
Particularly in societies like Britain and India, where we have chosen a permanent, politically neutral, meritocratic civil service, whereas elected governments come and go. In that context, how incentives can be misaligned and how civil service becomes a permanent priesthood.
Okay.
Resist change. While the politician is elected on the promise of reform, on the promise of change, and gets a mandate, the politician is always stymied, blocked by the civil service, which is status quoist, which is wedded to its own values, inward looking. So that's what Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister portrayed, that brilliant series, humorous but very insightful and brilliant.
Right.
Our challenge is that plus much more complicated.
Okay.
That is the basic status quoism or the inertia of a civil service and the inherent clash between a permanent civil service and a political executive elected to change. But in our country, all three elements, integrity, competence, and commitment, for the bulk of the civil servants are questionable. Very few have all three. We require all three. Any one or two not sufficient. So it's more than that. For the reasons I stated, Britain does not have all-purpose generalist service. They recruit civil servants for each agency or a group of agencies. So a chancellor, a treasury permanent secretary will not become, let's say, a home secretary or a health secretary. Only in India that's possible. So this is an Indian creation. It's not merely a problem with dealing with bureaucracy, any large system anywhere in the world. Similarly, accountability is missing. Irrespective of your competence and your output and outcome, you are guaranteed a lifelong tenure and guaranteed time-bound promotion. Whereas in Britain, they move towards each state agency being treated as some kind of a profit center. There's no profit in a monetary sense, but they measure the outcomes very carefully, they hold them to account, and they give autonomy to deliver those services. We still have not created that culture, except in a few very successful organizations like ISRO. ISRO is highly respected because at low cost, they deliver pretty good results. Because ISRO functions like this executive agency, what Britishers called executive agency model. So this whole idea of new public management, executive agency model, they have not really penetrated the Indian psyche. We are still continuing the old colonial tradition. And then the monopoly of key jobs. Since Thatcher's time, at least, in Britain, they started bringing the finest members of the society, the successful pioneers of society in various fields who want to be in public service. They brought them into a public service. In India, even today, parallel recruitment is uncommon, frowned upon, resisted very fiercely. So monopoly. So our problem is more than Yes Minister. We have all the problems of Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, plus we have the unique Indian challenges because of the way we structured the civil services.
Right. Speaking about the structure, so you said three features of Indian bureaucracy, that is the monopoly, generalist, and lifelong tenure. So let's talk about the third factor, lifelong tenure. Do you think in this day and age we need a lifelong tenure for the IAS?
I think we cannot afford that. The armed forces in India, they serve as a good example. What happens? While officers are recruited at a young age, up to for X number of years, everybody rises. After that, it has to be a pyramidal organization. You can't have a cylindrical organization or inverted pyramid. Right? Top management, fewer people. At the bottom rung, larger number of people. After a certain level, such a lieutenant colonel or something, or colonel, then to the next level, everybody cannot go. There's no ODM attached to not being able to go to the next level. They retire, they take whatever is their entitlement for post-retirement, and they do their own thing in life.
Right.
Because they're accomplished people, they have a lot of experience, they can do a lot of things in life. Again, next level, once you become brigadier, next level, if you don't make it, again, goodbye.
Okay.
So something like that is required. Maybe for 15 years or so, everybody must have a chance to really acquire things and make a difference and so on and so forth. But after that, unless there is a system of screening and deciding who goes to the next level, and others simply go back home and do their own things in life, because good quality managers with deep understanding of public systems are required to manage the economy outside government. They're valuable. But within government, once you have everybody there in a cylindrical structure, it became top heavy. There used to be one Inspector General of Police for each state heading all the police forces of the state. Today we have above Inspector General, Additional Director General and Director General. We have probably half a dozen to dozen Director Generals in each state, another dozen or so Additional Director Generals, and of course maybe 30, 40, 50 IGs, Inspectors General. So we made it a mockery. And once we have so many people, many of them really not well suited, available as a pool for the key positions, what happens? All kinds of nefarious practices come in. You don't necessarily choose the best, you choose the most pliable. So it's hurting both ways. Top heavy, cylindrical structure, creating excessive fat at the top, and not necessarily picking the best, because once there's a pool of recruitment available for key positions, anybody can be picked up. Then excessive partisan politics and other unhappy trends in public office, in appointing people for key public offices, they're becoming the norm. So there must be a complete transformation of the civil services required.
Right. So in your opening remarks, you talked about the UPSC recruitment exam. You said you gave a few numbers, about 700 or 800 thereabout posts, and about 1.3 million people appearing for the examinations. So let's talk about the perception of civil servants in media, or let's say in social media. If you see in the social media right now, you see the shots and reels where you have convoys of IAS officers going somewhere, and then in movies and cinemas also we see that one IPS officer, one IAS officer transforming the entire society. What do you think? What do you have to say for that?
It's a disgrace. Without mincing words, many people appear for civil services not because they have a passion for public good or talent for it,
Right.
but because society and they glamorize these positions of power, not service.
Okay.
They're not prepared for service. And if you're a topper in your engineering or medicine or something else, it's a natural thing. The family, the society, and the kids themselves think that that's the job. The glamour, the glitter, the sex appeal of these positions. And our films also glamorize in a terrible way sometimes. As a result, once they come in, they realize that they are just cogs in the wheel. There's a democratic system of governance. We're a large and complex country where people are served very poorly. Look at the outcomes. And almost all the key indicators, India is not doing very well. It's not always the politicians that are wrong. True, there is much that is wrong with the politics of India. But we are happy to blame the politician and let off the bureaucracy very lightly. As I said, there are exceptional civil servants who are doing a great job. But that's a small percentage. The bulk of the civil services are failed in the country. And unless we deglamorize the civil services, unless we don't require the brightest minds and geniuses in civil services, we actually require people of average intelligence but diligence and great commitment to public good who will be here. So, because of the misalignment of incentives, as I mentioned, and because the society excessively exaggerates their importance, almost worships them at a very young age, arrogance, corruption, ignorance, very little ability to acquire new knowledge and understand, the humility required is missing. incompetent delivery, they become endemic in the country. Look at our education. We're spending a lot of money in the country for school education. In many states, more than 100,000 rupees, 110,000 rupees per child per year. Our outcomes are appallingly bad. They're disgustingly bad. I'm saying with the deepest sense of responsibility, with a deep sense of anguish. We can easily set it right. How come year after year, decade after decade, we're not showing significant improvement? When we have our aspirations to be a global power, to be an economy which is somewhere at the top, to become a prosperous country in the next 2 decades or 3 decades, how come our education is so bad and there are no real signs of significant improvement? You can't blame the politicians. So I can go on and on citing many, many things. We definitely have to do a lot. And the arrogance of civil servants, the projection of civil servants in cinemas. In a movie, often they show the civil servant as a wonderful hero, the politician as a crooked villain.
Right.
And civil servant tells the politician with great arrogance that you will be there only for a few years and you will be thrown out by the people. I'll be here for the next 35 years. What arrogance, what undemocratic, utterly illiberal impulse. What ignorance. It is absolute shame. Whenever I hear things like that, I feel deeply, deeply distressed. 44 years ago when I was under training in Karimnagar district in today's Telangana, I remember vividly a minister, a freedom fighter, the first generation minister after independence. He was a technical education minister. He happened to come to the district because they were starting a new polytechnic college in those days. I was a young probationer. He kept calling me sir. I said, Mr. Minister, you are a senior man, elderly man, probably elder to my father. You are a freedom fighter. You are a minister of the state. I am a young officer who is trying to learn, and I am a public servant. Don't call me sir. His answer, Ankit, gave me tears. He said, sir, I'll be out of power after 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. But you'll be there for the next 35 years. If I don't call you sir, I will not get anything done. I felt the deep sadness of our dysfunctional democracy. If people think that this is a sign of progress, a sign of democracy, they're mistaken. If we don't respect our people, if we don't respect our people's verdicts, if we don't respect the elected executive across parties, if we don't respect our legislatures, this is no democracy then. It does not mean that we will simply do their bidding. It does not mean that we will be more loyal than the king. It means that you respect the people's primacy. And within the bounds of the Constitution, you do your best to protect the Constitution and the law of the land and help the political executive to frame the right kind of policies and do your best to execute it energetically, honestly, impartially. Instead of doing that, it's an arrogant pissing contest. It is vilifying the elected politicians all the time and finding excuses for your own incompetence. And of late, I'm told, even the anonymity is completely missing. The social media, you said, cameras following them and glamorizing them further. These fellows, they have no business. We are patterned after the British Civil Service. Anonymity is a very critical virtue. Anonymity does not make you weak. It makes you strong. Where you must speak, you must speak. Before a policy is made, you must be fearless, you must be truthful. That's why Sardar Patel gave us protection that no other country offered. There's nothing equivalent of Article 311, etc. in the world. No country gives civil service that abnormal constitutional protection. The idea is that you'll be fearless, you'll be truthful to the Constitution, you'll be impartial, you will not be bowing before political vagaries. You will do what is right for the country without fear of consequences. But you serve. We've forgotten that. We've taken it as a privilege, an elite club. And unfortunately, not many are doing a great job of either policy making or execution, impartial, competent, and colorless. So I think a lot of introspection is required. We have to transform civil services. Taxpayers must raise their voice. We must take the comments of a chief minister beyond partisan politics, because this is the lament of every elected leader in the country. Some people may say it, some people may not say it.
Right.
But take it from me. Every elected leader in India, they feel the same way. But because speaking out or antagonizing bureaucracy may ultimately cause harm to them, they all keep quiet mostly. But it's time that we all spoke up, not with the intention to destroy bureaucracy, but with the intention to improve, because our people deserve the best. We can't have mediocrity in governance and in performance. And mediocrity is not entirely because of politicians. At the same time, while they don't do what is right for the people, they're only too ready to do the politicians' bidding in the wrong sense. They appear to be more loyal than the king. The way they suck up to politicians in power without any dignity. That does not speak of a dignified civil service. So this is not the way a dignified civil service should behave. Look at France. Between 1945 and 58, there were 16 governments in France. French civil service is also lionized like Indian civil service. It actually held the country together, gave a sense of direction, gave a sense of leadership. Not with personal aggrandizement, but collectively they could give a mission to the country. In many ways, the European Union today, the precursors were created by the French civil service in those days. Take Italy. In 55 years, they had 58 governments. Only recently they have some degree of stability. But the civil service held the country together. In India, we have not even served that function very well. So we must be honest and we must be able to introspect. And we must give up this mania, this desperation to get into civil services or government jobs at any cost. It's a sign of a feudal society, not a sign of a modern progressive society. Civil service has its place, but it's not the most important thing in the country. We require scientists, we require professionals to serve, we require teachers, we require farmers, we require millions of other people who are productive, who actually provide the goods and services for the bulk of the people of the country.
Right.
Whereas we made civil service, we put it on a pedestal, we lionized it, and we're not getting the best out of them. The country is poorly served.
Right. So speaking of introspection, let's look at what is happening in the United States of America. There is a new Department of Government Efficiency constituted that has Elon Musk and everything. So do you think we need some kind of a institution or introspection like that in our country?
I have no doubt about it. There are so many redundant organizations because in the first flush after independence, because of a foolish obsession with license permit quota Raj, because of not understanding the failure economically and otherwise because of absence of market economy, competition and choice. We created government monopolies, government controls, government plans, and we ended up in disaster. But the institutions and the practices that were institutionalized then, we continued those things. For instance, a simple example, I think Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal was telling us the other day, a tariff commission, which has zero role in a liberalized economy. Its office, its staff, drawing fabulous salaries and allowances, continue there doing zero, nothing. And to wind it up, they're not going to be sacked unlike in America. In America, they can sack. In India, nobody is sacked. Article 311 makes it very hard, even if the courts allowed it. But in this situation, if you're not utilizing them well, it's difficult to sack them anyway. We can repurpose them. But even that, it took years and years of intense struggle to make a difference to 80 employees of Government of India who are redundant, to utilize them elsewhere effectively. Even today in states, for instance, 70 to 80% of the employees, if you exclude the school teachers, they are clerks and until recently peons, drivers. You should have tasks and teams. Every employee must have purpose. If what you can do in private sector or in a non-profit sector, let's say with 100,000 rupees, let's say taking care of a social welfare hostel. If there are 100 kids there, maybe government spends 1,200 or 1,500 rupees per month, 1.5 lakh expenditure. Even assuming that everything is clean, above board and honest, and you know how difficult it is to make everything clean, above board and honest in India. If there are 50 fellows, they show 100 fellows. if the government gave 40 or 50 rupees allowance per day, they knock off some money there. We know all the stories, newspapers, television are full of it. But assuming everything goes well, to administer this 1.5 lakh rupees for 100 children in that 1 month, you have 3 or 4 employees who are paid about 2.5 lakh rupees a month. Even if assuming everything is honest. Is it efficient use of our resources? There are schools where there are 2 students and 3 teachers. There are actually some schools in this country and several states where the teachers outnumber the students enrolled. I'm not saying there are thousands, but there are definitely hundreds in India. We're not able to rationalize them and deploy the resources in the form of teachers sensibly. There are schools where there are no teachers for hundreds of students. There are schools like this. So across departments or within a department, there are areas which are underfunded and without suffering for want of human resources. Your forensics, your crime investigation, your prosecution, your judiciary. You can go on and on. Many, many areas. The areas which are very fat, doing nothing. There's ethitosis, as Arun Shauri long ago called. Indian state is ethitotic. So there's a massive restructuring required. If anything, if any country among democracies requires this massive restructuring, it's India. You don't have to sack anybody. You have to repurpose them, retrain them. And those who are in the right positions, you must train them. They are simply dysfunctional. They don't know what to do. I guarantee you, a vast majority of the lower bureaucracy in government does not know anything about what they're supposed to be doing. They become messenger boys. We're giving them fat salaries by Indian standards. Forget corruption, other things, they're obvious. Even without corruption, we're giving fat salaries by Indian standards. We're getting very little for the people in terms of services and goods, public goods. This is not the way a country should govern itself. There's a massive restructuring required. We require not one DOGE, but maybe 10, 15, 20. Every state must have one. And there must be a de novo appreciation, because there are areas which are underfunded and under-resourced. Your urban management, your rule of law, your land management. We have antiquated instruments, whereas some other areas are very fat, useless. You have to completely cut out those things, excesses. So there's a lot of restructuring required in India.
Right. So the Chief Minister in his remarks also mentioned that the younger civil servants are not tendering enlightened advice to the political executive. So do you think the learning of a civil servant after he or she clears the examination, the UPSC or whatever the state examination is, do you think the learning stops somewhere?
90% cases, yes. We have now arrived.
Okay.
We are God's gift to humanity. We are the best of the best of the best, chosen. And it's not merely their failing. The society starts worshipping them. The kind of adulation, the kind of publicity for doing nothing is amazing. Second, because of a generalist mindset, there's no incentive or desire to actually excel in a fast-changing world. Every day, new things, dramatic things are happening. If I don't understand what's happening in the rest of the world in various sectors, either institutions and practices or the technology and the ways forward, if I don't understand, I can't be of service to the country. The notion that no, like Solomon, by just common sense, you can do practically anything, you can learn on the job. I was appointed long ago as head of a couple of apex cooperative banks in the then Andhra Pradesh state. I was never a banker. I never studied economics. My knowledge is rudimentary. So humbly I went to 2 of my predecessors, one of whom became a high constitutional authority in India, another became a high constitutional authority in the state later. I went to them and I filled notebook after notebook, all the information they gave and knowledge they tried to transmit. They gave a lot of useful information. But the 2 most important things about the bank on that day, that was in the aftermath of Chaudhary Devilal's loan waiver. My bank had the lowest recovery rate in India of the loans advanced. It has therefore the highest default in the country, in the history of the country, for cooperative banks. I became chief executive without knowing these 2 central facts about my bank. Not because they tried to conceal, because they were unaware. They ran the banks, or so they thought, without even knowing these simple things. Because you sit there and you push the files, don't know anything about it. We must shut this arrogance. We must not think that we are capable of doing everything under the sun. We must learn to get the best in the country who can meet the global norms, global standards, to come and occupy those positions. Then even the civil service will improve. Once there is that competition, the civil service also will now have the urge to excel, because after all, they are insiders. They have deep understanding of grassroots, what's happening. Nobody has a better ringside seat. So if an incentive is there, they can actually perform much better. But when there's no need to improve your professional skills, those jobs anyway are guaranteed to you, why should you excel? Some people do still, but most people don't.
Thank you for sharing your perspective today, Til.